The Lord promises life abundantly. That includes physical life. That includes having the ability to stand up straight and to embody a really good example of the principles that you hold dear. Deadlifting is a form of evangelization.
All right, so I am here with Parker from the Chivalry Guild. The Chivalry Guild is an interesting Twitter account that has recently come onto my radar, and which I was pretty interested in because it's a new account, and it's one of these kind of new types of accounts that you see out on Twitter nowadays, which is, it's very theoretical, it's very historically researched, but it's also very aesthetic, and it's a clear historical, philosophical, aesthetic brand project. And this is a new type of internet persona. This is a new breed of especially Twitter-based kind of intellectually oriented content. So I just find it very interesting. You seem to be a very interesting example of this, Parker. So I wanted to bring you onto the show just to talk a little bit about, the theories and histories of chivalry, the aesthetics of chivalry, and unpack a little bit how you've kind of built the project, why you launched this project, and just little lessons you might have learned along the way in kind of navigating this new weird, intellectual space on the internet. So thanks for coming on, Parker. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. So why don't you hit the audience with what is the essence of chivalry in your view? And with the personal angle, tell us a little bit about, why you thought this was an important territory to research and to write about and to build an internet brand around. Okay,
so my project really started after I read The Necessity of Chivalry by C.S. Lewis. And Lewis says that the essence of chivalry is captured in this line from The Death of Arthur. It's the eulogy for Sir Lancelot. And the lines are something to the effect that, "Thou wert the meekest man that ever ate in hall among ladies, and thou wert the sternest knight to thy mortal foe that ever put spear in the rest." And Lewis says that the essence of chivalry is captured in this double demand that it makes on human nature. That a man be both courteous and gentlemanly, but also ferocious, and someone that you really do not want to cross someone that you really don't want to make angry. I thought this was fascinating because for the longest time, whenever I had heard of chivalry, it was simply, a man holding a door open for a woman and some nostalgic onlooker saying, "Oh, I guess chivalry isn't dead." And Lewis is making the point that it's really something much more invigorating than that. It's really deeply aspirational. It has grand ambitions to turn a man into, in Lewis's words, a work of art. So I just thought that this was wonderfully eye-opening. It was not what I was expecting. And I went on and said, this is so great. This fits in perfectly with this kind of vitalist Twitter. And I went looking, and I was just shocked to find that there was nobody who was popularizing this. There was nobody who was really trying to run with this. And so I just thought that was something I had to do. And that was about a year ago, and it's been going really well ever since.
Okay, fascinating. So yeah, you started about a year ago. You have somewhere around 10,000 followers now, so I'd say that's a pretty good growth rate. How did you think about conceptualizing the project, launching the project at the early stage when you were like, I want to tackle some kind of public intellectual project? Just tell me, how did you think about the initial parameters? How did you decide you wanted to focus on a Twitter account? How did you decide that you wanted to do this kind of aesthetically branded, pseudonymous persona? Just how did you think through the very initial stages of carving out this project?
I should add that right before I had read Lewis, I read Bronze Age Mindset and just thought it was wonderfully ingenious. And so I was following BAP closely and all things BAP related on Twitter. And this just seemed to fit in really well with that. Maybe just combining my interest in Catholicism, Christianity, with that kind of vitalism, and showing that there is some room for a Christian vitalism. There's that. There's also a long-running interest I've had in manosphere-related things, mostly because I think that they're kind of lame to a certain extent. I'm thinking back to my childhood, my formative years, and how just tremendously uninterested the culture was in thinking about masculinity or manliness. And once it seemed apparent that people were starting to get interested in that, I was really eager for that development. I really wanted to see what would come of that. But everything that I encountered in the manosphere was just quickly turned into kind of a lame, self-helpy, weird lumberjack, dandy aesthetic. One book I got on it was really adamant that, you read Rudyard Kipling's poem If, and you memorize Ben Franklin's 13 Virtues. And that was really the extent of it. So I've always kind of wanted the manosphere to be better than it is. And this seemed like kind of the way of going about it. So there's something of that in my account, in my project. And then also just Twitter aesthetics is so lively, so wonderful. It really cleanses the timeline. So it just seemed really natural that the knightly, chivalric, medieval aesthetic fits in really well with that project and adds something to it. In addition to the Gothic cathedral, which is, I think really related to the concept of chivalry. Those are both products of the same medieval mind. So,
okay.
That's kind of a jumbled way of trying to account for the things that I like to put forward on the timeline.
Yeah, I hear that. Okay, cool. So do you have any kind of, what's your background? Like, do you have any kind of intellectual background, or are you just a guy who likes to read, books about medieval knights, and you're just like, oh, I'm passionate about this. I can research this and make a whole kind of content engine around it. Like, what kind of background do you have on this kind of stuff?
Not much.
That's cool.
That
kind of makes it even more interesting in a way, because that's what's so cool about this kind of new internet sphere, is that it's like, if you're sufficiently interested and passionate and you can put in the work to like read a lot of books and translate that into interesting, meaningful, aesthetically resonant content, like you can build these really fascinating little projects. So I find it even more interesting that you don't necessarily have a particularly sophisticated background or any expertise in this. So as someone who doesn't have an expertise, some kind of like official fancy expertise, that is, so you're obviously developing one. How do you think about that project of, going from someone who's doesn't necessarily have any kind of fancy intellectual background to deciding that you're going to like develop themes around a certain concept and make yourself an authority on something? Like, just how do you think about that? What does that involve? Are there any lessons you've learned in how you've like begun to make this, project of self-cultivation?
Yeah, that's a tough question. There's a good bit of imposter syndrome going on. I've just undertaken a course of reading the songs, reading the Arthurian literature, reading medieval history, reading biography, and just trying to do that as quickly as I can and make up for what I don't know. in a sense, I was the recipient of a really shabby public school education. So I'm just in all ways to make up for that, make up for lost time. I have a graduate degree in English literature, so I'm kind of a literary guy, and I'm really interested in history, the way history and literature go together so nicely. So
Right.
I'm just trying to take that, and I've always had an interest in the Middle Ages, but now I'm really doing the crash course study that I should have undertaken long ago.
Okay, cool. So tell me a little bit about how you work. I think people will find this very interesting because we definitely have a lot of people in my community and indie thinkers as well who are very interested in similar kinds of projects like this one, where people have a certain kind of interest in a certain set of themes. They want to do focused research on those themes, and then they want to do content around them and build a kind of brand or project around them. But I think a lot of people struggle to figure out what exactly is the regiment that is best. How exactly concretely should one do this? So give us great detail, as much great detail as you can on how you operate. Like, are you going to the library and getting a stack of old books about like medieval knights and the codes of conduct from the 1400s or something, and then you're like reading those books, you're translating them into a Word document? Are you primarily just writing tweets in a Word document and then editing them and posting them? Are you scheduling them? How many are you doing per week? How do you just paint for us, if you will, kind of the system that you've created to build out this project on Twitter?
Yeah, as best I can explain it, I have two main Word documents. I have a reading journal and then a notes for Twitter page. And I do my reading, like I said, in the great songs, in medieval history, in the Arthurian literature, try and transcribe whatever really strikes me as fascinating in my journal, and then try and think about how that can be incorporated. And in my for Twitter document, I've got it divided into all of the various themes that I like to hit. And so I just like to have a big reservoir of ideas to tap into. I kind of admire these people who just tweet stream of consciousness. I don't really do that. I've got to kind of plan them out a little bit more thoughtfully, make sure I'm not repeating myself, make sure there's a little bit of variety. I try to aim for about 5 tweets a day, 3 or 4 retweets that are on brand. So I'm definitely more of a quality over quantity type guy. I want to tweet well rather than just firing off a bunch of tweets onto the timeline. I also, in reading some people's thoughts on Twitter, really want to take care to give my tweets some time to run. So, I don't want to be tweeting one tweet after another in 20 minutes before, I start stepping on my previous tweets. That's a part of my strategy. 5 tweets a day, spaced out pretty well, 2 or 3 hours in between.
I think this is interesting to people because, it's not bad to get to 10,000 followers in a year just doing 5 tweets a day. I think a lot of people would think you would need to do more than that to grow at that kind of rate. So that's interesting. And are there particular kind of types of tweets or particular forms of content that you find to be particularly important for growing an audience around these types of projects? Like, are the more aesthetic ones, do those get shared more widely? Are threads better than individual tweets, or what have you learned in terms of the types of tactics that have worked the best for you?
Yeah, I would say that I started out and I was really frustrated because when I would try to compose threads, I wanted to just not, tweet out only these kind of one-line takes. I wanted to do something a little bit more substantial than that. But, when I tried my initial threads, they got very little engagement. And I was really discouraged by that. So I kind of gave up on them for a while. And I give a shout out to a friend on Twitter, this account named Aristocratic Fury. This guy is a European historian, and he puts together these just and detailed and long, and they get massive engagement. So I was pretty excited after seeing his success to give it another go with the threads, and that has my second go round has worked much better. I was listening to somebody talk about threads, the value of threads. Even if they do get lower engagement, they do so much to build ethos, to build credibility and authority, that they're just definitely worth it. Even if they don't, engage as big as the one-off tweets. So that's been my development in that. As far as the aesthetics tweets, yeah, I really like hitting a nice mix of theory of chivalry, hitting directly the sources, doing the literary stuff, doing the aesthetics stuff. I really like the idea of integrating all of those.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing that perspective. I think a lot of people will find it kind of inspiring to know that, you can do what you've done within just 1 year, basically just from reading history books and, writing out interesting, thoughtful content, just 5 tweets a day. It seems like doable. It's not, it's I'm sure a lot of hard work to stay consistent with that, but it's very doable. And I think what people underestimate is that on Twitter, or really on any online platform, being super focused in terms of brand and content really, really helps, because once you get some followers, they love specifically the thing that they kind of signed up for from you. And so if you keep going with that, it compounds more rapidly. And I think people don't appreciate that. So it's like with someone like me or whatever, if it's just like your personal account and you tweet whatever you're interested in or whatever you think, it's like, the problem with that is you're talking about all different types of things. And, some people like it. Some people like some of the topics I talk about, but then they don't like the other topics. So on any given tweet, the alignments between like my audience and the tweet is not super tight. Whereas if you're like, I'm the fucking chivalry guy, and every tweet is just like fire content about like chivalrous ethics and aesthetics, it's just like everyone following loves that stuff. So every tweet is going to be much more likely to be shared and embraced. So that kind of like hyper focus in terms of themes and aesthetic really, really is a benefit for growing these kinds of niche intellectual accounts.
I can definitely testify to that. I've become more disciplined as my account has grown. I used to have a tendency to add in a political take here or there, and I've since learned better. This account should be very, very focused on medieval thoughts for modern living.
Makes a lot of sense, and I think people should pay attention to that if they're interested in building this kind of project. So, okay, great. So let's talk a little bit. That was very revealing, and I think will be useful and inspiring for all the people out there who are working on these kinds of niche intellectual upstart projects. Now, let's talk a little bit more about just the substance of chivalry. In a previous conversation you and I had off the record, you said some very fascinating things to me about how, I think you said at one point that Christians don't have to be bugmen. This really kind of stuck in my mind. So why don't we start with, why, in your opinion, are so many Christian men today? Why are they so naturally inclined to becoming bugmen? And what are they missing? What is the mistake that leads them to become bugmen when they don't need to?
I was thinking about this. There's so much going on here that I'm only going to be able to capture a sliver. But there seems to be this just relentless drive towards simplification in our understanding of any given concept. And so we have to take things that are, you know, really nuanced, like Christianity, and we have to reduce it simplistic terms. And we seem to have focused in on the meek shall inherit the earth and turn the other cheek, and made that the whole of Christianity. So anything that doesn't go along with being meek or turning the other cheek is really suspect. And I'm no classical philologist, but my understanding of the Greek term that is translated meek is that it has to do with training war horses to be composed, to not respond to fear or provocation, but only to the master's command. And so, that's a pretty wonderful martial image that we have just turned into a really close synonym for just pure weakness and being a pushover. I don't know if it has to do with meek simply rhyming with weak, that we just assume the synonymousness there, but that's a big part of, I think, why there's a credibility. There's something that our pagan vitalist bros are hitting on when they say that Christianity is for bugmen.
Okay, fascinating. And so give us some specific insights that you've pulled out of the chivalric codes that would be useful for Christian men to think about on how to not be a bugman, and how to actually think about this Christian vitalism. What are some heuristics or frameworks or bits of insight that you've extracted from your research?
Well, I love to reference Geoffroy de Charny's A Knight's Own Book of Chivalry. He's writing this in the 14th century. He's just this legendary French knight, renowned for his prowess. And he writes this manual. It's pretty much the best manual that we have on chivalry. And the essence of it, we need to get back to prowess. At this point, the French knighthood is just getting trampled on by their English counterparts. He says we have to return to prowess. We have lost our way. We've gone soft. And so, this might be kind of crude, but I simply think that, to use a Baptism, sun and steel, like we need to just become physically vigorous again. And there are so many forces working against that. This is not just a problem with Christian men. This is a problem with men altogether. I'm sure you've heard that tidbit about how the average 22-year-old man today has the testosterone levels of a 67-year-old from 2000. And let's be serious. Like, men in 2000 are not the Spartans at Thermopylae. So, like, this decline has been just from previous decline. So I think that this is just the key. Like, it has to start with prowess. And there's actually, a pretty good justification, or a pretty good vindication of that in the chivalric literature.
Okay, fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if you could make the case that actually Christian men are ethically required to be more vigorous, to have more prowess. Maybe it has something to do with defending the faith or something like that, right? Or projecting the faith, right? I mean, you have to imagine the men who fought and died in the Crusades were probably, you know, pretty high tea, pretty vitalistic badasses, you know. So it's like, you know, could you even make the case that Christianity kind of requires men to not be bugmen, requires them to be vigorous and have prowess?
Oh, 100%. I think that deadlifting is a form of evangelization. I'm sorry, evangelization.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, the Lord promises life abundantly, and you know, I don't want to take that in directions that it shouldn't go, but that includes physical life. That includes, you know, having the ability to stand up straight and to embody a really good example of the principles that you hold dear. That's not unimportant. Yeah, maybe this is something else to go back to that previous question. One of the things that I most appreciate about BAP's project is that it just kind of belies this cliche that we've absorbed about how appearances don't matter. Appearances are always deceiving. Don't trust appearances. Okay, well, I can understand where people are coming from when they say that. Appearances can sometimes be deceiving, but a lot of times they're not. And so the exterior of a man and the interior of a man, those are aspects of the same person. They should be in alignment. A healthy spiritual life should oftentimes be reflected in a healthy and strong body.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because on one level, the superficial trappings of the material world are, you know, deceiving, and they are superficial, and you don't want to be, you know, pulled into the false allures of this earthly world, you know, beneath the appearances of, you know, social fashion and so on, is where all of the important stuff lies. So that part makes sense, but I think you're right that people kind of over extrapolate from that wisdom to some kind of naive idea that appearance altogether just doesn't matter. I think you're right that if you're living in a deep way, the correct way, if you're living the true life and the good life fully, then you should also tend to be producing beauty as a kind of natural byproduct. And if you're not producing beauty as a natural byproduct, then it's some possible sign that you're off the straight and narrow in a way. I think about this with the cathedrals of you know, the great cathedrals, basically. Like, if you think about the kind of itinerant laborers who built these cathedrals, it's kind of like, you know, these are some of the greatest works of art ever in the history of human history, basically. And they were made by itinerant laborers who obviously were, you know, knew what they were doing in terms of the concrete crafts, but, you know, they're not formally educated, you know, they're not like licensed architectural professionals, you know, and yet they so these are, you know, hardscrabble men, you know, doing the stonework and the metallurgy and all of this stuff. These are really hardscrabble men, and yet without formal education, they're able to collectively build these probably the most extraordinary works of art ever. And, you know, it's not for nothing that Christianity produced these greatest works of art ever, arguably. So yeah, I like to think of those examples of how, you know, no matter who you are or where you come from, if you're really correctly aligned on the good and the true, and then you're going to be producing beauty, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're you know, powerful or, you know, a manual laborer.
I love that idea of the cathedrals, because that is making beauty so as to please God. And there's just a really nice analogy there between the cathedrals and us. That's not to say we should, you know, go and get plastic surgeries and we have to just blow our budget on our wardrobe. But there is something about about presenting that vitality, having that interior vitality, and having it radiate outwards. I did want to say something real quick on the cathedrals. I think there's something really fascinating, and I'm trying to develop this idea. The relationship of strength and beauty when it comes to the engineering of those cathedrals. I always took it. Oh, excuse me. I always took it for granted that some of the distinguishing features of the Gothic cathedrals, the flying buttresses, the pointed arches, the ribbed vaulting, that was just for aesthetic show. But that's actually for strengthening and fortifying the structure so that this really heavy stone can go ever higher. And so that you can use wall space for for stained glass windows. There's a really fascinating relationship here between strength and beauty, and then the way in which those things that make the structure stronger, like, actually are quite beautiful. The flying buttresses and the ribbed vaulting, this stuff is actually quite beautiful. So I don't know. I'm still working on developing all of these thoughts about strength, but there's clearly something here that we have neglected in recent decades.
Right. And I'm curious just if there are other key things that especially Christian men today should keep in mind or need to keep in mind. Like what really are all of the things you need to do to be a modern chivalrous Christian vitalist? You've obviously alluded a little bit to physical fitness and having physical prowess. But what else? I'm sure there are other things. You tweet about many different things like bro science and also esoterica. So tell me about some of these other strands.
My research has led me to a formula of 6 essential chivalrous virtues. And the 6 are prowess, courtesy, honor, generosity, loyalty, and faith. So, of course, I like to start with prowess, but then moving on to courtesy. I really like to think about how one can be an engaging gentleman in this time of, chronic fatigue and chronic grumpiness and, social anxiety that comes out as kind of a short-temperedness. So I really like to think about, the simple, easy ways that one can distinguish oneself just by simply being engaged, by being happy to see somebody else, by learning people's names, especially the kind of overlooked people in the places that you frequent, learning their name and calling them by name. This is obviously a huge aspect of modern chivalry. Honor, the development of a really good reputation and the maintenance and care of it. Generosity. This has been a pretty fascinating thing to learn about. The way that knights were expected to give largesse almost recklessly. So I've been trying to think about ways in which we can be chivalrous with money. I would include in that shopping as much as you can locally, patronizing local farmers. Yeah, even if it is more expensive than the stuff that you'll get at Kroger, that is a fruitful expense of resources. So I like to think about that, and if a person doesn't have money to give, you can be generous in so many other ways, generous with your time, generous with your good cheer. I also, this links pretty nicely to prowess, because the man who has developed his strength can be generous in so many additional ways, helping his friends with difficult physical tasks, protecting those who don't have people to protect them. This is maybe at the heart of chivalry. The knight is called to defend the widow and the orphan, especially because they have nobody else to defend them. So again, prowess kind of bleeding into generosity, and then finally, like I said, faith. It's worth emphasizing because maybe the Victorians kind of secularized it, but chivalry is the product of the most deeply Christian age in history. This is not separable from the faith. So that's the formulation I like, the 6 chivalric virtues. And then I like to bro science obviously relates to prowess. Esoterica relates to prowess. It also relates to, medieval mystical faith, a sense that the world is not explained by this rationalistic science that we put so much faith in.
Yeah, that's great. That's fascinating. And do you see any figures in contemporary public life who are, good representations of chivalry? Are there any, I don't know, currently living authors or actors or maybe even entrepreneurs, anyone in public life today who is a kind of surprisingly impressive example of modern chivalry, and or also like cultural artifacts like movies or books or even TV shows, maybe like anything in public life today that is kind of striking positive examples of what you have in mind?
Well, I would say, and I want to give credit here to a now defunct podcast that had really good episodes on the way chivalry has survived in different forms in modern archetypes. They had an episode on how the cowboy is basically the knight errant brought into the American West. In many ways,
like Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, John Wayne, absolutely.
Right. And what's the podcast? You didn't say the name.
Oh my goodness, I can't recall right now. It might be Chivalry Today.
Okay, we'll find
Chivalry Today.
Okay, so the cowboy, that would mean kind of maybe contemporary American Western films would be one kind of example, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the private eye or the detective is in some ways an adaptation of the knight errant. He always seems to kind of have a squire who fits into his projects. There's always a damsel in distress. There's always a quest for him to go on. Right. So these come to mind. As far as people, this is a decade and a half back, but I go back to Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman was an NFL player who, after 9/11, left the Arizona Cardinals to join the Army Rangers. He died in Afghanistan in 2004, I believe, and there's a lot of ugliness involved with his death. It was not under the most noble jingoistic conditions, and then there was an attempt to cover that up to make it seem noble and jingoistic. But nonetheless, this guy was so off the charts awesome and manly. there's just so many stories about him, and loyalty. He would constantly like turn down bigger paychecks because he felt a sense of loyalty. Now that might have been very misplaced, but nonetheless, like this is a man out of time.
Okay, fascinating.
I like Alexander Usyk. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but he is the current heavyweight champion boxer, or at least he has 3 belts. But he's a Ukrainian, I believe. He's a devout Orthodox Christian. He he prays for his opponents. He is never brought into the kind of Conor McGregor, uh, you know, silly showmanship. There's a real gentlemanliness about what he's doing, and I don't know all that much about him, but as I try to survey the scene and find examples of chivalrous people, he comes to mind as a really nice possibility. I think I'll do an essay on him coming up soon here.
Those are great recommendations. I always like hearing about people who are currently living, who are kind of worth, looking into and paying attention to, and perhaps being admirable. So those are interesting leads, which I did not know anything about either of those guys. So cool. Very cool. Okay. Fascinating. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm curious, like, if there's just anything else that, I haven't asked you that I should be asking you, that you think, you've learned about chivalry that my audience might be particularly interested in. I've been thinking about it kind of from my own perspective. Like, what you're saying resonates with me in a way, because if I'm being brutally honest with myself, over the past year, I kind of fell into some Bugman habits in a way. I'm not too bad, but like, through the pandemic, I gained a little bit of weight. I'm a little less like on point than I generally am. And when I think about it, a lot of it has to do with I've been building like this business operation basically, and business like sucks the life out of you basically, and it business, like contemporary business world, is basically just like Bugman machine. Basically, it turns you into a Bugman in so many different ways. It's kind of the opposite of the chivalric code in a way, because it's like, you're trying to build this like instrumentally rational, efficient thing. You're kind of by definition concerned with making money, and that's kind of the opposite of the generosity value that you alluded to. And it's kind of intrinsically ugly in a way, because when everything's getting pulled into this kind of instrumental rationality, you'll make certain aesthetic decisions that are more aligned to like optimizing some kind of result rather than just being beautiful and good and true. And so, I like to think I'm an honest guy and a good person, and I keep things balanced. But even still, just in the operation of like building a business, it's just like a very, I don't know, it can be just an intrinsically kind of soul sucking thing, especially if you're like me and you get kind of like obsessed with things and you want to win certain games. You try to win that game, and it pulls all the life out of you physically, emotionally, psychologically, and kind of just makes you a boring, kind of ugly, Bugman basically. So I like thinking a lot about what you're saying. Basically, I'm just like, I want to live a life where, I care less about money. I care more about just being handsome and thoughtful and kind and strong and good. And it's just like, if you could just focus on being all of those things, you just have faith that like money will come. I think this is like one of the cool things about like true Christian faith, especially among powerful men, is like you genuinely don't care about money. You're just genuine. I mean, you care about like maintaining, all minimum like basic responsibility around finances and stuff like that. But you're genuinely kind of like, I trust that God will look after everything. I'm just going to be responsible. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to be loving and generous and loyal to those who matter. And I just trust that God will take care of the money. The money will come. It's not a big deal. You don't have to like seek the money as your main thing in life, which will just make you ugly and bad and weak. So I'm kind of ranting here a bit, but I'm just trying to kind of throw onto the table some like personal data points that resonate with what you're saying, I think.
Have you read Burke's Reflections. He's
A
got
long time ago, I read bits like probably in grad school, but I don't recall very much now.
He says, the age of chivalry is gone and it's been replaced by that of sophisters, economists, and calculators. And yeah, there really is something about industrial capitalism that makes our lives easy and comfortable and safe, and it makes it really hard to face. I just, think of like what they've done with children's playgrounds. I don't know if you've kind of kept your eye on this, but they used to have playgrounds that kids could really play on and be. Now they have just been made so lame.
Yeah,
right.
It's so bad. They're like made out. Everything's made out of plastic now, and it's like these like fake soft floors. And they're so lame. It's like there's nothing even fun to do on them. I remember even when I was growing up, and I'm not that old. I remember the playground in my neighborhood when I was first young enough to like go to the playground by myself. Whenever your parents let you do that, I guess at my day and age, it was like, I don't know, 8 years old or something like that. Maybe I was allowed to go to the local neighborhood playground by myself. I might be botching that, but ballpark. I remember the slide. I was scared to go on the slide. It was that big, and I was so relatively small that you had to climb a pretty large staircase, and the whole thing was made of steel or aluminum, whatever it was made out of, some combination of metals. It was an all metal slide. There was like this very tall spiral staircase. You had to go up to the top, to the point that it actually stretched my nerves. It stretched my fear and my anxiety to go on it for the first time. And that's what playgrounds should be. That's what kids should be constantly. Kids should constantly have margins and junctures where they feel uncomfortable, but it's all, controllable. The slide wasn't going to fall down. As long as I was like focused and had basic motor skills, I was not going to hurt myself on that slide, but it was a little bit scary. And if I was really, really stupid, maybe I would fall off and like break an arm, and that would serve me right. But even then I probably wouldn't die, So it's like, we need exactly that type of danger for our kids, and you just can't get it anywhere nowadays. Everything is so padded.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what industrialism has done, and in economics. And yeah, long story short, we arrive at the metaphor of the lame playground, which is 100% safe and no fun at all, and just lame. And there has to be this really, maybe this is, kind of in closing, there has to be a really vigorous attempt to overcome modern industrialism's designs for us. It's really hard, but it's your vitality.
Right. Well, I really love what you're doing, and this was an interesting and fun conversation for me that really kind of resonated with me personally in a lot of ways because of the reasons I was just talking about. And, one of the most exciting things I think about what you're doing and what you're kind of showing with your project and what you see across the internet nowadays, if you know where to look, is that in a way, if you can resist all of these temptations to bug manification, and you can focus on just being a good person, being a super thoughtful person, being an excellent writer, being handsome, being physically fit and conscientious, and you can genuinely cultivate these now very rare but very laudable traits and qualities, and you can at the same time just publish them, right, and showcase them, and just give people a place to rally around them and to subscribe to them and or to support them or engage with them in some ways. It's like the internet is now it's possible to use the internet as this machine to kind of invert these bad incentives under industrial capitalism, and you can kind of embody these laudable and rare traits, build an audience around it, build a system around it, build energy and attention around it. And in a way, these niche internet communities and niche internet platforms are a way to basically win the game of life and win under industrial capitalism while focusing on these rare and truly good traits and qualities in a way. And I think this is still underestimated, how you can kind of use the internet to make profitable in a way, or make at least economically sustainable, these very, very niche kind of lifestyle, artistic, intellectual, aesthetic kind of lifestyle creations or cultivations. It's like you can make them minimally profitable and sustainable through just showcasing them on the internet. And I think that's very interesting to me, because, you know, I just think about like my own projects. It's like, if I get too obsessed with building a business and I become a bug man, like everything I do is going to suffer, and I'm actually going to be less successful in the long run, basically, with what I'm building, right? So it's like, if I could actually care less about business and focus on these other truly laudable and very rare qualities, and just make them more of a priority in my content and what I'm writing and publishing and creating, like that's actually going to be better for everything I'm building in the long run, even in terms of instrumental rationality and results and all of that logic. So I think, yeah, I like projects like yours, because you're kind of showing that actually, you know, you can, if you go really deep and just focus and build a whole research agenda and a kind of content and aesthetic around these rare but laudable qualities, you can actually build real power in the world today around them. People like you and your prime, obviously you only started a year ago, but I think it's very easy to see that projects such as yours, or like Wrath of Non, these types of projects could become whole media companies, you know, in the long run. I think someone like Wrath of Non is probably a few years ahead of you. But there's many others like that who really could build a whole set of properties around these kinds of intellectual / aesthetic brands, basically. So maybe one question before I let you go is, I'm kind of curious, like, do you have longer term ambitions? Do you have a bigger kind of vision for doing this over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and like building something bigger around it? Are you thinking in those terms, or not? I mean, you might not be, no, you don't need to be, but I see like there could be real long-term potential for these types of intellectual aesthetic brands. I'm just curious what you think or how you see that.
This subject really resonates, and I want to run much further. So that's definitely in the plans. I thank you for your kind words on that. I maybe, just to connect to your previous comment, in a certain sense, I think that this corner of Twitter really kind of saved my life in a sense. It saved me from this boomer monoculture narrative, and showed me so many of the ways in which I had been lied to my entire life. Everything from, eating steak to getting sun to darker things, porn, promiscuity. So I just echo your comments, like the work being done here, not necessarily mine, but the work being done by some of the leading voices on this corner of Twitter. Like, this is astoundingly important. And I would like to contribute however humbly I can.
I love it. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Parker. This was fascinating to learn about, how you built your project, how you think about it, some of the concrete aspects of the regiment in your research agenda. So it's been just really interesting to look under the hood, and it's also been a very rewarding conversation around what exactly is chivalry and this idea of Christian vitalism. And you gave us a lot of good substantive food for thought on these themes. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I'll put links in the show notes to all of your stuff. It seems like the main place you want to send people is your Twitter, right? That's the centerpiece of your work at the moment. So I will put a link in the show notes so people can go say hi to you, give you a follow, and check out your work. So thanks again. I just want to, I appreciate you coming on.
Justin, thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. You made it all the way to the very end, so you must really like the show. In that case, I would be super grateful if you'd be so kind to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. All you have to do is go to otherlife.co/review. That's otherlife.co/review. And it'll send you to Apple Podcasts. Just leave a review. You can be honest. Tell me what you really think. I'd really appreciate it because it'll help other people find the show. And I'm really trying to grow out the podcast. So thanks for listening. And thank you for leaving a review. I really appreciate it.